After having bought the works of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Gopi Krishna and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, I finally decided to buy the autobiography of an Indian saint, whom I will indicate by P.Y. It was a book I had seen some years before but had not bought because it didn't contain practical instructions. My hope now was that I would be able to find useful information such as the addresses of some good yoga schools. This autobiography enthralled me and created a strong aspiration toward the mystical path. In certain moments I found myself almost burning from an internal fever. This provided fertile ground for the coming of an event which was radically different from any I had experienced before. It was a kind of intimate experience. Nonetheless, since I have listened to similar descriptions from yoga practitioners, I have decided to share it. One night while pausing after reading this book, I felt a shiver similar to an electric current spreading itself throughout my whole body. A shiver was insignificant in itself, but it frightened me. My reaction was rather strange since I had always believed I was immune from fear of all things related to transcendence. The thought flashed through my mind that a deeper event was going to happen soon and that it was going to be strong. Very strong, and I would not be able to stop it in any way. It was as if my memory had some inexplicable familiarity with it and my instinct knew its inescapable power. I made up my mind to let things happen unimpeded and go ahead with the reading. Minutes passed and I was not able to continue reading. My restlessness turned into anxiety. Then it again became fear. An intense fear of something unknown which was threatening my existence. Certainly, I had never experienced a similar state. In past moments of danger, I used to remain paralyzed, unable to think. Now my thoughts were stirring frantically, picturing the worst results, loss of psychological balance, encounter with an evil entity, perhaps even death. I felt the urgency to do something, even though I did not know what. I set myself in the position for meditation and waited. The anguish increased. A part of me, maybe the totality of that entity I call myself, seemed at the point of melting away. The worst thoughts hung over me without a clear reason. I was well aware of what happened to Gopi Krishna, the author of Kundalini, Path to Higher Consciousness. He described the awakening experience he had through a daily intense concentration on the seventh chakra. Later on, because his body was probably unprepared, he met serious physical and, as a reflex, psychic problems as well. According to his description, a very strong energy began to flow inside his spine from the coccyx region toward the brain. So strong was the energy that he was bedridden and could not accomplish normal bodily functions. He literally felt as if he was being burned by an inner fire which he could not put out. Weeks later, he intuitively discovered the way to control the phenomenon. The upward flow of energy through the spine became a persistent experience of internal realization. I was afraid I too had come to the threshold of that same experience, but since I did not live in India, perhaps people around me might not understand. The consequences would have been terrible. I could not be reassured that my experience would be channeled toward a positive conclusion. In those terrible instants, the spiritual world appeared to me to be a sorrowful and horrible nightmare, able to annihilate and destroy whoever would imprudently approach it. Ordinary life, on the contrary, seemed the dearest and healthiest reality. I was afraid I might not be able to get back to that condition again. I was convinced that through my intense practice of 2 simple breathing exercises I had opened a door I was not supposed to open, therefore I tried to stop the experience. I stood up and left the room, out to the open air. It was night and there was nobody to whom I could communicate my panic. At the center of the yard I was burdened, choked, almost crushed by a feeling of desperation, envying all those people who had never practiced yoga. I suddenly felt guilty and ashamed of the harsh words I had used against a friend who had been involved in part of my search. Like so many others, he had shunned any practice and decided instead to enjoy life, equipped with a juvenile boldness. I had addressed him with a tone far from affectionate, which now started to thunder inside my head. I was sorry I had thrown unjustified cruelty at him without really knowing what was in his mind and soul. I would have liked to tell him how sorry I was to have brutally violated his right to live the way he thought was best. Perhaps he had preferred to protect his mental health rather than become unstable or insane through practices he was unsure of. After returning to my room, I hoped that, because of my great passion for classical music, listening to it might yield the positive effect of protecting me from anguish and help me get back my usual mood. It was Beethoven's Concert for Violin and Orchestra, which I listened to in my room with headphones, that soothed my soul and after half an hour eased my sleep. The following morning I woke with the same fear. Strange as it may seem, the idea that every day in my present life stirs a joyful emotion in my heart, conveyed at that moment a feeling of horror. I mean the belief that man can practice a definite discipline in order to attune to the divine intelligence, which is the first cause of everything existing. Sunlight poured into the room through the gaps in the shutters. I had a whole day before me. I went out to try and amuse myself by being with other people. I met some friends and spent the afternoon cracking jokes and behaving like the people I had always considered lazy and dull. In this way, I succeeded in hiding my anguish. The first day went by. My mind was totally worn out. After 2 days, the fear had diminished and I finally felt safe. Something felt changed anyway. 1 week later I began, calmly and objectively, to ponder the meaning of what had happened. I understood the nature of my reaction to that episode. I had cowardly run away from the experience I had pursued for such a long time. In the depth of my soul, my dignity urged me to continue with my search exactly from the point where I had quit. I was ready to accept all that was to happen and let things follow their course, even if this process implied the loss of my wholesomeness. I resumed the practice of pranayama again, as intensely as before. A few days went by without detecting any form of fear. Then I experienced something very beautiful. It was night. I was lying in a relaxed corpse pose when I had a pleasant sensation, as if an electric wind was perceived over the surface of my skin, propagating itself quickly and with a wavy motion from my feet up to my head. My body was so tired I could not move, even if my mind had ordered it to. My composure was serene. I had no fear. Then the electric wind was replaced by another feeling, comparable to an enormous power pouring into the backbone and quickly climbing up to the brain. The experience was accompanied by an indescribable, and so far unknown, sense of bliss. The perception of an intense brightness accompanied everything. My memory of that moment is condensed into a single expression, a clear and euphoric certainty of existing. Like an unlimited ocean of awareness and bliss. The strangest thing was that in the very instant I had it, I found it familiar. In God Exists, I Have Met Him, A. Prasad tries to give an idea of his spiritual experience. To that end, he creates the concept of an inverse avalanche. An avalanche collapses, runs downhill, first slowly then faster and violently at the same time. Prasad suggests we should imagine an upside-down avalanche which begins strengthening at the foot of the mountain and climbs up pushed by an increasing power. Then suddenly it leaps up toward the sky. I do not know how long this experience lasted. It definitely peaked out at only a few seconds. When it ended, I turned on my side and fell into a calm, uninterrupted sleep. The following day when I awoke I had forgotten it. It only came up some hours later, during a walk. Leaning against the trunk of a tree, I remained immobile for a couple minutes, enthralled by the reverberation of the memory. I was flooded with great joy. An elated condition stretching out far past the limits of my awareness, a sort of memory hiding in the recesses of my subconscious, began to be revealed, as if a new area of my brain had been stirred to a full awakening. I found myself contemplating a dreamlike reality. Still objectively indisputable, it had arisen in me with the naturalness of a primordial instinct, although it had nothing to do with the world surrounding me in which I lived. The meaning of the experience I was going through was sufficiently clear to me. I had no doubts that the reality I had contacted was my inner self. The practice of pranayam had provoked it by cleansing the subconscious part of my sight. I had no fear since I had trained my consciousness to live by the contemplation of beauty. Another thing became adamantly clear. I would have to choose a profession that would not occupy all my energy. I had to live a simple life, never betraying the inner self that was revealed to me.